Sela's eyes fluttered open to the cold touch of metal beneath her. A sharp, throbbing pain pulsed at the back of her head, and for a moment she was disoriented. The dim light of Vortinine's twin moons cast eerie shadows across the wasteland. She tried to move, but something heavy bound her wrists and ankles. Chains. Her heart pounded. She was lying on railway tracks, her arms stretched above her head, shackled tightly to the steel rails. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled, the rough metal biting into her skin. The more she moved, the more the chains rattled, but they would not budge. She wasn't alone. A few feet away, the figures of her former allies stood, watching her with cold expressions. Gorvax, the reptilian smuggler she had once trusted, crouched beside her, his yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I warned you, Sela," he said, his voice a low hiss. "You had a choice. Join us, or—" He gestured to the tracks. "Well, you made your decision." Sela gritted her teeth. "I made the right one," she spat. "I won't help you smuggle weapons to warlords who slaughter innocent people." Gorvax sighed, as if disappointed. "A shame. You were useful, but loyalty is everything in this business, and you betrayed ours." Sela's claws flexed, but she was helpless against the restraints. "And you betrayed me first." Gorvax chuckled. "That's how the game works, girl." He stood and turned to the others. "Train's due in 10 minutes. Let's move." She struggled harder as the group walked away, their laughter fading into the night. The distant rumble of an approaching train sent shivers down her spine. She couldn't see it yet, but she could feel the vibrations in the rails. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to breathe. Panicking wouldn't help. Think. She had always been quick, always found a way out. But this time, there was no lock to pick, no weak link in the chain. She pulled at the bindings again, ignoring the sharp pain as they dug into her fur-covered wrists. No use. The smugglers knew how to secure a prisoner. The rumble grew louder. A cold sweat broke across her skin. She twisted, hoping for something, anything, to give her leverage. The desert wind howled around her, kicking up dust, making it hard to see. Then, a sound, different from the train's roar. Footsteps. Soft, cautious, but unmistakably human. Sela's sharp ears twitched, hope flickering to life. She turned her head as a shadow moved through the darkness. A man stepped into the moonlight, his silhouette sharp against the wasteland. A human. He wore a long, dust-streaked coat, his boots scuffed from travel. A utility belt was strapped to his waist, filled with tools and weapons. His face was partially hidden under a hood, but his eyes, sharp, alert, scanned the scene quickly before landing on her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he crouched beside her. "You look like you're in a bad spot," he said, voice calm but firm. Sela exhaled sharply. "No kidding." The human glanced down the tracks, his jaw tightening as the train's distant lights appeared over the horizon. "No time for small talk," he muttered, pulling a small plasma cutter from his belt. Sela's pulse quickened as he activated the tool, its blue flame humming in the night. He started cutting through the chains at her wrists. The heat from the cutter was intense, but she didn't complain. "Hurry," she urged. The train was coming faster now, its headlights burning like twin suns in the distance. "Working on it," the man replied, not looking up. Sparks flew as the metal groaned under the cutter's blade. The first shackle snapped open. Sela wasted no time and yanked her freed arm away. The human moved to the next. The train's horn blared, a deep, echoing sound that sent chills down her spine. The ground shook beneath her. "Move faster," she snapped. "You try doing this under pressure," he shot back. Another chain broke. Only her ankles remained bound. The train was close now, too close. The rail beneath her trembled violently. The human cursed and pressed the cutter to the last chain. The heat singed Sela's fur, but she barely noticed. The train was seconds away. With one final spark, the last shackle snapped. Sela didn't think. She rolled, pushing herself off the tracks as the train thundered past. The force of it sent her tumbling into the dust. For a moment, everything was a blur. Metal screeching, wind howling, heart pounding. Then silence. She lay still, breathing hard, staring up at the starry sky. Then a hand appeared in front of her. She looked up to see the human standing over her, offering to help her up. She hesitated. Trust wasn't something she gave freely, but he had just saved her life. With a sigh, she took his hand. His grip was strong, steady. "Name's Daniel," he said, pulling her to her feet. "You okay?" Sela dusted herself off, her muscles still tense. "I'll live." Daniel studied her for a moment, then glanced toward the desert. "Who did this to you?" Sela hesitated. The thought of Korvax and his crew still made her blood boil, but she wasn't sure if she should tell this human the full story. "Some people who don't like loose ends," she said finally. Daniel nodded, as if he understood. "Well, they picked the wrong loose end to leave behind." Sela met his gaze. He wasn't like the others she had met before. There was no greed in his eyes, no hunger for profit, just quiet determination. For the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Sela's legs were still shaking as she stood, dusting herself off. The cold desert wind brushed against her silver fur, but she barely felt it. Her heart was still pounding in her chest. The image of the train rushing toward her burned into her mind. If this human, Daniel, had been even a few seconds late, she would have been nothing but dust and broken bones by now. She looked at him again, this strange man who had risked his life to save her without even knowing who she was. Humans weren't exactly common on Fortinine. Most who came here were traders, mercenaries, or criminals looking to make quick money. But Daniel didn't look like any of those. His long coat was worn, his boots covered in dust, and his belt filled with tools rather than weapons. A scavenger, maybe. Daniel watched her carefully, his sharp eyes studying her, as if deciding whether to trust her. "You sure you're okay?" he asked again. Sela rolled her shoulders. Her body ached, but she had survived worse. "I'll be fine." Daniel nodded, then glanced down the tracks. The train had long disappeared into the distance, leaving only silence and the smell of burning metal from his plasma cutter. "So," he said, crossing his arms, "mind telling me why I just risked my neck to save a stranger?" Sela hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to tell him. Trust was dangerous. She had trusted Korvax and his crew once, and they had left her to die. She wouldn't make that mistake again. But Daniel had saved her life. She owed him something. "I got on the wrong side of some bad people," she said simply. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That much is obvious. Who were they?" Sela exhaled, looking out at the dark wasteland. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the distant glow of a mining outpost. She had no weapons, no supplies, and nowhere to go. Korvax and his crew would assume she was dead, but if they found out she was alive, they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. She turned back to Daniel. "Smugglers," she admitted. "I used to run with them. Then I found out they were smuggling weapons for a warlord. I refused to help, so they decided to get rid of me." Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he sighed. "Yeah, sounds about right. Smugglers don't like loose ends." Sela narrowed her eyes. "You seem familiar with this kind of thing." Daniel shrugged. "Let's just say I've been around." He glanced at her chains, now lying broken on the tracks. "You got anywhere to go?" Sela hesitated. She could lie. Say she had a ship waiting somewhere. But Daniel didn't seem like the type to fall for lies easily. And the truth was, she had nowhere to go. "No," she admitted. Daniel sighed again. "Figures." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking like he was thinking. Then, after a moment, he said, "All right. There's a small town about 10 miles west of here. I was heading that way before I found you. You can come with me, at least until you figure out your next move." Sela frowned. "Why?" Daniel looked at her. "Why what?" "Why are you helping me?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You don't even know me." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe because leaving people to die isn't my style." Sela studied him, trying to figure out if there was more to his answer. But his face was unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll go with you." Daniel smirked slightly. "Good, because you don't have a lot of other options." The journey begins. They started walking west, the cold night air wrapping around them. The wasteland was quiet, except for the occasional sound of distant creatures scurrying in the darkness. The stars above shone brightly, untouched by city lights. Sela walked slightly behind Daniel, watching him closely. He moved with an easy confidence, like someone who had spent years surviving in places like this. She wondered what his story was. He had saved her without asking for anything in return. That wasn't normal, not in a place like Fortinine. After a while, Daniel spoke. "So, what's your plan? Assuming those smugglers don't find you and try to finish the job." Sela frowned. "I don't know yet." Daniel nodded. "Well, if you're smart, you'll get off this planet. Vortinine isn't kind to people with enemies." Sela sighed. "I don't have a ship, and I doubt anyone's going to give me a free ride." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe I can help with that." Sela glanced at him. "You have a ship." "Not exactly," Daniel admitted. "But I know someone who does, a pilot in the town we're heading to. He owes me a favor." Sela studied him. "And you'd be willing to call in that favor for me?" Daniel shrugged. "Depends. Are you going to run off and get yourself killed as soon as I do?" Sela smirked slightly. "No promises." Daniel chuckled. "Figures. Trouble finds them." They walked in silence for another hour before Sela's ears twitched. Something was wrong. She stopped, eyes scanning the darkness. Daniel noticed her sudden tension. "What is it?" Sela's sharp eyes caught movement in the distance, small lights flickering in the dark. "Vehicles. Moving fast." "We've got company," she said. Daniel followed her gaze. He cursed under his breath. "Let me guess. Smugglers." Sela's jaw tightened. "Probably." Daniel pulled a small blaster from his belt. "Guess they figured out you're not dead." The vehicles were getting closer. The roar of their engines echoed across the wasteland. Dust rose in thick clouds behind them. Sela clenched her fists. She had barely escaped with her life once. She wasn't going to let them take her again. Daniel turned to her. "Think you can fight?" Sela bared her sharp teeth. "Try me." Daniel grinned. "All right then. Let's make them regret coming after you." As the smugglers' vehicles closed in, Sela and Daniel took cover behind a cluster of rocks, ready for the fight ahead. Sela crouched behind a jagged rock, her sharp eyes fixed on the approaching vehicles. Dust swirled in the night air as the engines roared louder. There were 3 of them, light sand cruisers, fast and built for rough terrain. The smugglers weren't taking chances. Daniel peeked out from cover, gripping his blaster tightly. "They're moving fast," he muttered. "We've got maybe a minute before they reach us." Sela flexed her claws. "We can't outrun them." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, we fight." Sela smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." The first cruiser came into view, its headlights cutting through the darkness. A gunner sat on the back, gripping a mounted blaster. The moment he spotted them, he shouted something to the driver. The gun swiveled toward them. Daniel reacted first. He raised his blaster and fired. The shot struck the gunner's shoulder, sending him tumbling off the vehicle with a pained yell. The second cruiser accelerated, moving to flank them. Sela ducked as blaster fire scorched the rock beside her. "They're trying to pin us down," she said. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Not if I can help it." He reached into his belt and pulled out a small round device, a grenade. Clicking the activation switch, he tossed it toward the second cruiser. The moment it hit the ground, a blinding flash exploded, lighting up the desert like a miniature sun. The driver of the second cruiser swerved, blinded by the sudden light. The vehicle skidded sideways and slammed into a boulder, throwing its occupants onto the ground. Sela didn't waste time. She sprinted toward the fallen smugglers, her claws digging into the sand. One of them, a thick-armed reptilian, was already getting back up, shaking off the impact. Sela leaped, landing on him with full force. She drove her elbow into his chest, knocking the air from his lungs. He fell back, gasping. The third cruiser kept coming, its gunner now opening fire in wild bursts. Daniel ducked behind cover, returning fire with quick, precise shots. One hit the driver's arm, causing the vehicle to swerve, but it kept coming. "They're stubborn," Daniel muttered. Sela jumped back toward cover as more shots blasted the ground around her. "Then we finish this quick." Daniel glanced at the first cruiser, the one where he had shot the gunner. It had stopped a few meters away, abandoned. An idea formed in his mind. "Cover me," he told Sela. Before she could ask why, he sprinted toward the empty vehicle. Sela cursed under her breath, but didn't hesitate. She fired at the smugglers, forcing them to take cover. Daniel reached the cruiser and jumped into the driver's seat. The controls were simple, just like the old cargo haulers he used to drive. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the vehicle roared to life. The third cruiser was still coming. The gunner aimed straight at him. Daniel didn't slow down. The gunner fired, but the shot went wide as Daniel swerved at the last second. The impact was brutal. The front of Daniel's cruiser smashed into the side of the third vehicle, flipping it over in a violent crash. Silence followed. The desert was still again, except for the crackling of damaged engines and the moans of injured smugglers. Daniel climbed out of the wreckage, dusting himself off. Well, that worked. Sela walked toward him, shaking her head. "You're either very brave or very stupid." Daniel smirked. "A little of both." She glanced at the wreckage. "Are they dead?" Daniel checked the overturned vehicle. The driver and gunner were still breathing, though badly injured. "No, but they won't be chasing us anytime soon." Sela nodded, satisfied. She turned toward the desert horizon. "We should move before more of them show up." Daniel agreed. "Come on, we've still got a long way to go." On the move again. They continued west, leaving the wreckage behind. The desert stretched endlessly, the cold night air biting at their skin. After a while, Sela broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that, you know." Daniel glanced at her. "Do what?" "Take that risk," she said. "You could have let me handle them myself." Daniel smirked. "And miss out on all the fun." Sela shook her head but smiled slightly. They walked for hours, the mining town still a distant glow on the horizon. Eventually, exhaustion started to creep in. Daniel stopped near a small rock formation. "We should rest for a bit," he said. "We'll reach the town by morning." Sela hesitated, but her body was tired. She nodded. "All right." They sat on the sand, backs against the rocks. The stars above stretched endlessly, a sea of silver against the dark sky. Sela glanced at Daniel. "You've done a lot for me already. You don't even know me." Daniel shrugged. "Like I said, leaving people to die isn't my style." Sela studied him for a moment. "You've been through something, haven't you?" Daniel was silent for a while. Then he exhaled. "Yeah, but that's a story for another time." Sela didn't push. She understood the weight of past wounds. She leaned back against the rock, closing her eyes for a moment. She still didn't fully trust him, but one thing was certain. Daniel was different from anyone she had met before. And for now, that was enough. The desert night stretched on, silent and vast. Sela sat against the rock, arms crossed, her sharp ears listening to the wind. Though exhaustion weighed on her, she didn't allow herself to sleep just yet. She didn't trust the night, not after what had happened. A few feet away, Daniel sat with his back against another rock, adjusting the settings on his blaster. His face was calm, but Sela could tell he was alert, just like her. "You're not sleeping?" Daniel asked, not looking up. Zila smirked. "Neither are you." Daniel chuckled softly. "Fair enough." He finished adjusting the blaster and set it beside him. "You always this cautious?" Sela's smile faded. "Caution keeps you alive." Daniel nodded, understanding. "Yeah, I get that." The desert air was cold, but the sky was clear, filled with stars. The mining town they were heading toward was still far, just a faint glow in the distance. Sela finally allowed herself to relax, just a little. "You said you know someone in that town." "A pilot." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, a guy named Ray. He's not exactly the most honest man, but he owes me. If anyone can get you off this planet, it's him." Sela leaned her head back against the rock, staring at the stars. "And what about you?" Daniel glanced at her. "What about me?" "What happens after you help me?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Haven't decided yet." Sela studied him. There was something about him, something restless, like he was running from something but didn't know where to go. She understood that feeling too well. Before she could say anything else, something in the distance caught her attention. A flicker of movement against the dark sand. Her body tensed. "Daniel," she whispered. He was already looking in the same direction. "I see it." The movement was slow, careful, shadows shifting in the night. Too smooth to be a wild animal, too quiet to be anything friendly. "Smugglers?" Sela whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe." Slowly, he reached for his blaster. Sela flexed her claws, ready to fight. Then, the silence shattered. A bright red laser shot past them, hitting the rock between them with a sharp blast. Sand and dust exploded into the air. Sela rolled to the side, dodging the next shot. Daniel fired back, hitting one of the approaching figures. A muffled shout followed as the attacker dropped. "Move," Daniel shouted. Sela didn't need to be told twice. She sprang into action, dashing toward a cluster of rocks for cover. Daniel followed, firing as he ran. More figures appeared from the shadows. At least 5 of them, maybe more. They were dressed in dark desert gear, their faces hidden behind masks. Sela ducked behind cover as another blast struck the sand near her feet. "They're not smugglers," she said. Daniel crouched beside her. "No," he agreed. "Smugglers wouldn't be this quiet." Sela peeked out, scanning the attackers. Their movements were precise, controlled. "Mercenaries." Her heart sank. "They're professionals," she muttered. Daniel swore under his breath. "Someone really wants you dead." Sela clenched her fists. "Not just me. You too." Daniel glanced at her. "Well, that's just great." Another blast hit the rock near them, sending sparks flying. The mercenaries were closing in. "We need a way out," Daniel said. Sela's sharp eyes scanned the desert. The land was mostly flat, with few places to hide. But a few hundred meters away, she spotted something. An old wreckage half buried in the sand. It looked like an old transport vehicle, long abandoned. "There," she pointed. "If we can reach that, we can use it as cover." Daniel looked at the wreckage, then back at the mercenaries. "It's a risk." Sela smirked. "You afraid of a little risk?" Daniel grinned. "All right, let's go." A desperate sprint. They moved fast. Daniel fired as they ran, forcing the mercenaries to take cover. Sela dashed across the sand, her muscles burning with the effort. The wreckage was still far, but they were gaining ground. Then, a sharp pain shot through her leg. She stumbled, biting back, a cry of pain. A laser blast had grazed her calf, burning through her fur and skin. Daniel saw her fall and turned back immediately. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up. "Come on." Sela gritted her teeth and pushed forward, ignoring the pain. The wreckage was close now, just a few more steps. They reached it just as another volley of blaster fire rained down. Daniel dragged Sela behind a broken metal panel, both of them panting. "You all right?" he asked. Sela exhaled sharply. "I'll live." Daniel quickly checked the wound. "It's not deep. Just a burn." Sela nodded, trying to steady her breathing. "We need a plan." Daniel peeked over the wreckage. The mercenaries were spreading out, surrounding them. "They're trying to box us in," he said. Sela's claws tightened. "Then we break through." Daniel smirked. "I like the way you think." He pulled out another small grenade from his belt. "This should give us an opening." Sela's eyes widened. "How many of those do you have?" Daniel grinned. "Enough." He activated the grenade and threw it toward the largest group of mercenaries. The explosion sent sand and debris flying, forcing them to scatter. "Now," Daniel shouted. Sela ignored the pain in her leg and sprinted forward. Daniel covered her, taking down two mercenaries with precise shots. One attacker lunged at Sela, swinging a combat blade. She ducked, twisting around him, then drove her elbow into his ribs. He staggered, and she finished with a sharp kick to his chest, sending him to the ground. Daniel took down the last attacker with a clean shot. Then, silence. Sela took a deep breath, her body aching. That was close. Daniel exhaled, lowering his blaster. "Yeah." They looked at each other, both covered in dust, breathing hard. Then Daniel grinned. "You fight pretty well." Sela smirked. "You're not so bad yourself." She glanced at the bodies around them. "Whoever sent them won't stop." Daniel's expression turned serious. "Yeah, which means we need to get to that town fast." Sela nodded. "Then let's go." Together, they turned west, pushing forward into the night. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ray's vehicle sped across the desert, its engine roaring against the cold night wind. Sela sat in the back seat, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness behind them. The mercenaries weren't following, yet. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, still gripping his blaster. He glanced at Ray, who was grinning as he steered the rusted old vehicle. "You really had to bring up the money I owe you," Daniel muttered. Ray laughed. "Come on, old friend. If I didn't mention it, you'd think I was getting soft." Sela leaned forward. "Less talking, more driving. They won't give up that easily." Ray smirked. "Relax, lady. We'll be in town soon." Sela didn't relax. She had learned long ago that trouble never stayed far behind. The mining town, an old settlement built by humans and aliens alike, soon came into view. Dim lights flickered from shabby buildings, and large cargo ships rested on landing pads in the distance. Ray drove straight toward a small garage at the edge of town. As they pulled in, the large metal doors slid shut behind them. The engine hummed before falling silent. Daniel sighed, rubbing his face. "All right. Now what?" Ray stretched his arms. "Now, we talk business. The price of freedom." Ray's garage was cluttered with old parts, broken machines, and half-finished projects. It smelled of oil and metal. Sela folded her arms. "You said you could get me off this planet." Ray nodded. "I can. But it won't be easy." Daniel frowned. "What's the problem?" Ray sat on a metal crate, crossing his arms. "The mercenaries hunting you. They're not just some random thugs. They work for someone powerful." Sela's claws tightened. "Who?" Ray sighed. "A guy named Voss. Runs a lot of things in this sector. Smuggling, security, weapons trading. If he wants you dead, it means you're valuable to someone." Daniel muttered a curse. "So that means we're in even bigger trouble than we thought." Ray nodded. "And getting you off this planet won't be cheap." Sela narrowed her eyes. "You owe Daniel a favor." Ray grinned. "I do. But a favor doesn't buy fuel, bribe officials, or fix my ship." Daniel groaned. All right, what do you want? Ray's grin widened. There's a shipment coming in tonight. Something valuable. If you help me steal it, I'll get Sela off this planet, free of charge. Sela and Daniel exchanged a look. Daniel sighed. Of course, it's never easy. The heist begins. The plan was simple, at least in theory. A cargo ship was landing in the southern docks in an hour. The shipment belonged to Voss, and it was heavily guarded. Ray wanted something inside the crates, though he didn't say what. If we do this, Sela said, strapping on a holster. I want to know what we're stealing. Ray smirked. Fair enough. It's weapons. Rare ones. Voss has been smuggling them in for months. Daniel frowned. And you just happen to know this. Ray winked. I have my sources. Sela sighed. Fine. Let's get this over with. Infiltration. They moved through the dark streets of the mining town, avoiding patrols. The southern docks were quiet, too quiet. Large metal crates were stacked around the landing pads, and a massive cargo ship sat in the center, its lights glowing faintly. Guards patrolled the area, armed and ready. Ray pointed at a nearby control panel. If we disable their security system, they won't be able to call for backup. Daniel nodded. I'll handle it. Sela scanned the guards. I'll take care of the patrols. Ray grinned. I like this team. They split up. Daniel crept toward the control panel, moving in the shadows. He reached it without being seen and started hacking the system. His fingers moved fast across the screen. Sela, meanwhile, moved like a ghost between the crates. When a guard passed by, she struck fast, silent and deadly. One by one, she took them down without a sound. Within minutes, the area was clear. Daniel whispered into his comm. Security's down. You're up, Ray. Ray chuckled. Time for the fun part. He slipped inside the cargo ship, heading straight for the storage area. He found the crates and started unlocking them. Then, something went wrong. The alarm. A loud siren blared through the air. Sela spun around. What happened? Ray's voice came through the comm. Slight problem. Looks like Voss upgraded his security. Lights flashed across the docks. The remaining guards rushed toward the ship, weapons drawn. Daniel swore. Time to move. Sela leaped onto a crate, knocking down a guard before he could fire. Daniel shot another, clearing the path to the ship. Ray ran out, carrying a small crate. I got what I need. Let's go. More guards appeared, firing wildly. Sela dodged behind cover, returning fire. Daniel tossed a grenade, sending debris flying. They ran toward Ray's vehicle, jumping inside just as more guards arrived. Drive, Sela shouted. Ray slammed the accelerator. The vehicle roared to life, speeding away from the docks as bullets and lasers chased them. Escape and betrayal. They didn't slow down until they were far from the docks. Ray finally pulled over near his garage, breathing hard. Daniel glared at him. What the hell happened back there? Ray grinned. Security was tighter than expected. Sela narrowed her eyes. And what's so important about that crate? Ray opened it. Inside were several sleek, alien-looking weapons. These, he said, are worth more than a small planet. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. You better hold up your end of the deal. Ray smirked. Relax. A deal's a deal. You'll have a ship by morning. Sela wasn't convinced. Something about Ray's smile made her uneasy. She had a feeling this wasn't over. The night was heavy with tension. The stolen crate sat in the middle of Ray's garage, its alien weapons gleaming under the dim lights. Sela didn't trust Ray, but she had no choice. If she wanted to escape this planet, she needed him. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, watching Ray closely. You said we'd have a ship by morning. Where is it? Ray smirked. Patience, my friend. A good exit requires good planning. Sela wasn't in the mood for games. I don't trust you, she said coldly. Ray chuckled. You shouldn't, but right now, I'm your best chance." Sela's sharp eyes studied him. She had met men like him before. Charming, clever, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Daniel sighed. "Fine. What's the plan?" Ray leaned against a workbench. "Voss will be looking for us. He won't stop until he gets back what we stole." Sela smirked. "Then we make him regret coming after us." Ray nodded. "Exactly. A dangerous gamble." Ray's plan was risky. He had arranged a meeting with one of Voss's informants, pretending to sell back the stolen weapons. The goal was to draw Voss's men into a trap, giving Sela and Daniel enough time to escape. "This is insane," Daniel muttered as he checked his blaster. Sela tightened the straps on her boots. "It might work." Ray grinned. "Now you're thinking like me." The meeting was set for dawn at an abandoned scrapyard outside town. As they drove toward the location, Sela sat in the back, deep in thought. "You all right?" Daniel asked. She glanced at him. "I'm fine." Daniel didn't believe her. He had seen the way she tensed every time Ray spoke. "You think he'll betray us?" he asked. Sela nodded. "If it benefits him, yes." Daniel sighed. "Great. Another reason to love this plan." The meeting. The scrapyard was silent, filled with broken machines and rusted metal. Ray pulled up near a stack of old cargo containers. "This is the spot," he said. Sela and Daniel stepped out, weapons ready. The air was cold, and the rising sun painted the horizon in gold and red. Then headlights appeared in the distance. A black vehicle approached, kicking up dust. Daniel muttered, "Here we go." The vehicle stopped a few meters away. 4 men stepped out, all armed. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, smirked at Ray. "You got something that belongs to Voss," the man said. Ray shrugged. "Maybe. Depends on what you're paying." The man chuckled. "You don't get it, do you? You're not selling. You're surrendering." Sela's grip tightened on her weapon. Ray sighed. "Didn't think this would be easy." Then, without warning, the man raised his weapon. The fight begins. Sela moved first. She spun, kicking the nearest attacker before he could fire. Daniel ducked behind a metal crate, firing precise shots at the enemies. Ray dived behind a pile of scrap, laughing. "I love this job." Bullets and laser blasts flew through the scrapyard. Sela dodged behind a wrecked vehicle, using it as cover. Daniel shouted, "We're outnumbered." Ray grinned. "That's why I planned ahead." He pressed a button on a small device. Suddenly, explosions rocked the ground. The cargo containers toppled over, sending debris crashing down. The mercenaries stumbled, caught off guard. Sela took the chance. She charged forward, knocking down another enemy with a powerful strike. Daniel shot another attacker, then turned to Ray. "You could have warned us before you started blowing things up." Ray laughed. "Where's the fun in that?" A betrayal revealed. The fight didn't last long. The remaining mercenaries realized they were outmatched and fled. Daniel exhaled. That was close. Sela scanned the area. "Where's the leader?" Ray smirked. "He ran." Daniel shook his head. "Voss won't be happy about this." Ray clapped his hands. "Which is why we need to leave, right now." They hurried back to the vehicle. As they drove toward the shipyard, Sela kept her eyes on Ray. Something wasn't right. Then, just as they neared the exit, Ray suddenly swerved the vehicle to a stop. Sela and Daniel reached for their weapons, but it was too late. A dozen armed men surrounded them. Ray sighed. "Sorry, friends. Business is business." Captured. Voss's men grabbed them before they could react. Daniel struggled, but a rifle slammed against his back, forcing him to his knees. Sela growled, her sharp claws twitching, but she was outnumbered. Voss stepped forward. He was an older man, dressed in fine clothes, with sharp, calculating eyes. "I must admit," he said, "you caused me a lot of trouble." Sela glared at him. "Good." Voss chuckled. "You're feisty." I like that. He turned to Ray. Good work. Ray shrugged. I deliver what I promise. Daniel gritted his teeth. You traitor. Ray sighed. Come on, Danny. You knew I'd sell you out eventually. Zila tensed. They had been played. Voss smiled. Now let's talk about what happens next. Zila, Daniel, and Ray stood surrounded by Voss's men, their weapons pointed at them. The air was thick with dust and tension. Voss walked closer, his sharp eyes scanning Zila. I expected you to be dead by now, he said. You're more troublesome than I thought. Zila didn't respond. She was watching, waiting. There had to be an opening. Daniel glared at Ray. You really sold us out. Ray sighed. Nothing personal, just business. Voss smirked. A wise choice. And now, I'll take back what's mine. He gestured toward the crate of stolen alien weapons. Two of his men picked it up and carried it to their vehicle. Zila's heart pounded. If those weapons left with Voss, the entire mission would be for nothing. Voss turned to his men. Kill them. The escape begins. The moment Voss spoke, Zila moved. She lunged forward, grabbing the nearest guard's arm and twisting it. The guard screamed as his weapon fell. Zila caught it and fired at the next attacker. Daniel dived to the ground as bullets and laser blasts filled the air. He grabbed a fallen gun and started shooting back. Ray, he ran. Voss shouted, Stop them. Zila rolled behind a pile of metal scraps as more guards fired at her. Daniel took cover beside her. You got a plan? He asked. Zila smirked. Yeah, don't die. Turning the tables, the guards moved in, thinking Zila and Daniel were trapped. But Zila was faster. She jumped up, firing at a fuel tank near one of Voss's vehicles. The explosion knocked the guards off their feet. Daniel took the chance and shot another. Nice shot. Zila didn't stop. She charged forward, dodging blasts and taking down guards one by one. Daniel followed, covering her. Voss cursed, realizing the fight was turning. Get the weapons into the ship, he shouted. Two of his men ran toward the loading dock, carrying the stolen crate. Zila saw them. She wasn't going to let them escape. Chasing the weapons, Zila sprinted toward the loading dock. The two men were halfway up the ramp of a small cargo ship, carrying the crate inside. Daniel ran beside her. We need to stop that ship. They reached the ramp just as the engines powered up. The ship was preparing for takeoff. Zila jumped, tackling one of the guards. The crate slipped from his hands and crashed onto the ground, spilling weapons across the ramp. Daniel took down the second guard. Voss, standing behind them, growled in frustration. He pulled out his own weapon and aimed at Zila. But before he could fire, bang! A single shot rang out. Voss staggered, his face twisted in shock. Behind him, Ray stood with a smoking gun. Ray's change of heart. Voss dropped to his knees, then collapsed. His men froze, unsure of what to do. Ray spun his gun and grinned. What? You really thought I'd let him win? Daniel groaned. You're unbelievable. Ray shrugged. I saw the fight turning. Figured I should be on the winning side. Zila rolled her eyes. We don't have time for this. The rest of Voss's men will be here soon. They turned to the crate of weapons. Ray smirked. So, do we sell these or blow them up? Zila thought for a moment. If these weapons stayed in the wrong hands, it would lead to more war, more suffering. She grabbed a grenade from a fallen guard, pulled the pin, and tossed it into the crate. Boom! The weapons exploded, sending debris flying. The cargo ship's engine sputtered, then died. Daniel let out a breath. Well, that solves that. The final escape. Alarms blared. More of Voss's men were coming. Ray pointed to a nearby ship. That one's still working. Let's go. They ran up the ramp of the stolen ship. Zila jumped into the pilot's seat, pressing buttons as the engines roared to life. Daniel strapped in. Please tell me you know how to fly this thing. Sela smirked. I'll figure it out. Outside, Voss's remaining men fired at them, but it was too late. The ship lifted off the ground, rising into the sky. Ray laughed. Now this is an exit. Sela pushed the thrusters to full power. The ship shot into the clouds, leaving the chaos behind. A new beginning. As they flew toward open space, Daniel finally relaxed. So, what now? Sela glanced at him. I need to find my people. Ray stretched his arms. And I need a vacation. Daniel smirked. And I need a drink. They all laughed. For the first time in a long time, Sela felt free. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. No one would ever chain her again. The end.